Hi there, this is Jen, and I'm excited to be here with you today for another crafter party weekend. If you've got the box, you know it is an awesome box, just like all of them. But this one I really love. I love the mix of fall and Halloween. And so for my projects today, I'm going to make a few mixed media cards. It really is an easy process and super fun, and one of my favorite types of card making. And so I'm going to start out with the pattern paper. The pattern paper in this box is just so gorgeous. And so I chose the pattern paper that has kind of the fall leaves. And I am going to go ahead and reinforce this pattern paper by putting it on a piece of 8.5 by 11. I believe it's a 110-pound cardstock. It is the accent opaque white. So I'm just going to take my tape runner and add adhesive to the back and adhere the paper to the sheets. And then if there's any pieces that lift up afterwards, I'll go ahead and reinforce that with more adhesive. But I'm basically going to take my scissors and fussy cut out the images that I want for my card. Now these papers I believe are 8.5 or 9 long, and so they're pretty big papers. And so for this first card I decided to go ahead and use a bigger card size, but I went ahead first and cut out the pieces that I needed, and then took my craft knife as well to just do some of the little detail areas, like between the leaves. And so I am using a 5x7 card base for this. I am using some Bristol Smooth cardstock, and it fits fairly nicely on that, but there will still be a little bit that I'm going to need to trim off. And so I'll set that aside, and I'm going to start on the background. And what I'm doing is I'm taking some of these watercolor markers and adding a bit of the orange color and the blue in different areas of my paper, and then bringing the cut piece over and making sure that that color is kind of peeking out in different areas from behind that. And so I'm going to go ahead and just mark the paper with the colors and then wet my water brush and blend that color out. And I'll go ahead and keep adding the colors until I get a nice pattern. And orange and blue are opposite of each other on the color wheel, which means they are complementary colors, which means they will look great together. And a great way to figure out a design for a card is, especially if you're using pattern paper, is to look at the pattern paper and pull colors out from that, because most of the time when the pattern paper is designed, it's already going to have that figured out for you. So it's really easy just to look at that paper and pull out those colors that you can use elsewhere on your card. So I'm going to go ahead and finish marking up my paper and making sure that I've got a nice look for my die cut piece. And then I'm taking a little bit of water and spritzing the watercolor just so I can get it to move around a bit, so it's not so controlled, so it's a little bit less controlled, letting that water move around a little bit. And then I'm going to take my heat tool and dry that up. And once that is dry, I'm going to take the white rubber stamp that came in the box. It's kind of that scripty stamp or that book lettering, and I am inking that up with some antique linen distress oxide, and I am stamping that off once and then stamping it onto my background, just so that I can get a really light, subtle look of those that type print. Hopefully you can see it in the still shots. It's a little easier to see than on the camera, but I'm just doing that in several places around the card. And then I'm going to take a little bit of blue metallic watercolor. And I love adding splatter to cards, especially to mixed media cards, and so I am adding a little bit of metallic blue watercolor, and so I'll just wet that down and dip my brush in that and then tap that with my hand so that I get a little bit of splatter. And then I'm also going to add a little bit of gold splatter to the card panel, and I just think that shine from the blue and the gold, I just think it looks really pretty. And so I'm going to start assembling my card now. I am adding a little bit of not liquid adhesive, of my tape runner, And I'm not looking to get this exactly pushed down all the way. If there's little pieces sticking up here and there, I think that's great. I think it adds a little bit of dimension to the card. And then I'm going to trim off those excess areas that went over the edge of the card panel. And then that extra leaf that I cut out, I'm just going to pop it up over the leaf that was already there. And so I went ahead and added some adhesive, and then I'm going to add some foam to the back of each of those leaves to make sure that it stays popped up a little bit. And then there's these closed, I don't know if they're flowers, but there's these closed petals that I cut out also from that same pattern paper, and I'm just going to go ahead and add a little bit of adhesive and stick that in there as well. And one thing about mixed media that I try and do on every mixed media project or card is to add texture in some form. There's a little bit of texture there with the stamped lettering, but to add a little bit more, I'm using several of the buttons from the little pack of buttons that came in the box, and I have added those to a piece of twine, and now I'm just taking some glue dots to the back of each of those little buttons and adhering that kind of on top of the leaf. And then for the sentiment for this card, I went ahead and I grabbed a Tim Holtz, kind of one of the simple sayings sticker sentiments. And I chose it because a lot of times I like using those small little type font sentiments. I think it just adds a little bit of a kind of theme or a word to the card, but it's not so big that it takes away from the card itself. And so that's going to finish off my first project. This is probably my favorite one. I really, really love that pattern paper, and it's so easy to kind of make it your own and not just use it as a flat background on your card. This was really fun to grab those different pieces and cut them out. So on to card 2, the supplies that I am using from the box are listed on the screen, and I am going to go ahead and use that awesome scarecrow stencil that came in the box. And this is a 2-part stencil. It is a layering stencil. You can either layer the stencils on top of each other, and if you see those little octagon shapes on the stencil, that is what you line up with the second stencil or the coordinating stencil, which makes it super easy if you're not sure where to line the items up. But this is also a really easy stencil to line up in itself, just because you can kind of know what the parts are. Like now I am blending out the kind of the overalls of the scarecrow, and then I will pull that up and move the shirt portion and the hat right over the area that I just blended, and it fits perfectly. And I'm just using some traditional scarecrow colors. I guess they're traditional scarecrow colors. Some browns, and then I'm going to do the shirt in blue and the hat in browns again. And all 3 cards today are mixed media cards, but they all have a very different look to them. And I think we all have kind of an idea in our heads of what mixed media is and what it looks like. For me, a lot of times when I think of mixed media, or I picture in my head, it's kind of more of a grungy look. But really, mixed media is so many things, and there are so many styles and so many looks to it, because basically mixed media is just using more than one medium on your card. So you're probably doing it every day. But for me, when I do mixed media, I try and do a little bit of height through layering or adding dimension. I try to add texture. And there's so many ways to add texture to your project. It could be adding splatter as texture. It could be using an embossing folder. It could be kind of tearing the edges of paper, which adds that little bit of texture. Adding paste or stencil can add both dimension and texture. Adding different fibers to your project. Just lots of different ways that texture can be added. And a lot of times I will keep packaging, so things like bubble wrap or corrugated cardboard or pieces of cardboard, because I think they're excellent to use in mixed media. You can also save junk mail and use it as collage, which is a form of mixed media as well. So just a lot that you can do and experiment with and just have fun with. And I think that's part of the reason I love mixed media is because a lot of times I'm just experimenting and seeing what works, and there really are no mistakes. It is very hard to kind of decipher a mistake made on a mixed media card as compared to maybe a clean and simple card or another type of card where you kind of either have to disguise or hide something. And it's just really messy fun. And so if you haven't tried it, I really hope that you do. And just if you don't like it, then you don't like it. But I really hope if you haven't tried it and you're interested to go ahead and give it a shot. It is a lot of fun. So back to my card. I've set the scarecrow aside. I actually am going to fussy cut him out, and then I am going to work on the background. So I am using this stamp that's got a bunch of fall and Halloween words on it, and I'm going to use that for my background. So I'm going to stamp my card panel up in some VersaFine Clair, and this is called Golden Meadow. And VersaFine Clair is a pigment ink, which means that it is waterproof. And if you were going to add water to this later, it would not, the ink would not smear and smudge. And so I'm going to take that color and fill up the top portion of the card, and then I will set that back down and stamp up the bottom portion. And the great thing about pigment ink as well is that it stays wet for quite a while. And so I will be adding a little bit of gold embossing powder to the background. I'm not adding it all over. I add it in 3 different places on the card just to get a little bit of that gold, and then the rest will be just the ink color of the yellow. And then I'll take my heat tool and melt that embossing powder. And then I'm going to fussy cut out my scarecrow, which really wasn't too difficult to do. I like to use my cutter bee scissors to cut out when I'm fussy cutting. I think they work really nicely. And so I went ahead and cut him out and set him aside. And then I'm just going to grab some papers from my stash. Some of it is gift bag packaging. This piece right here, I believe, is gift bag packaging. And then just some random papers. You can also use tissue paper. Tissue paper is really great to work with. But I didn't know where my tissue paper went, and so I grabbed these instead. And I'm going to color these with some Distress Oxides in some different fall colors. And so the colors I'm using on this particular one is Candied Apple and Mustard Seed. And I'll go ahead and set that aside. And then I'm going to grab the paper with the print on it and wipe up a little bit of the ink that's on my surface. And then I'm going to add some more mustard seed, as well as a little bit of vintage photo. And then I'm going to take my water bottle and move that color around a little bit. And then I'm going to take my last piece of paper, which is, I don't know what kind of paper it is, but it's a little more fibrous than these other pieces. It's almost like handmade paper, but I'm not sure what it is. It's just something I picked up. I wanted to clean off a little bit of that color that was on my mat, and so I went ahead and wiped that up. And then I'm going to grab some of the prized ribbon, and then I'm going to go back over with the other colors that I've already used. A little bit of vintage photo, some candy apple, some mustard seed. I really wanted to use a bunch of different colors on this one, just to break up that orange and yellow of the other 2 pieces of paper. And so I'll go ahead and spritz this with my color, add a little bit of water. And then I'll use my heat tool to partially dry the pieces, but then I'm going to go ahead and set them aside and do some other things. And so next I'm taking a piece of twine. So this is just a white piece of twine, and I'm going to use it to wrap those different papers. And so I'm just taking that and running it through all of that extra ink that I have on my mat, and I will set that piece aside to dry as well. And then the dried pieces, I will crumple them up in my hands, and that's going to add some texture and some dimension. And then I'm going to tear these, and then they will be layered on top of each other. And if I knew how to sew, or even had a sewing machine, I think these would be an excellent set of papers to add a line of thread by running it through the sewing machine. I think that would look awesome. But since I don't, I am using the glue that came in the box. So this is, I believe, the newest bottle of glue from Maker Forte. It is the clear glue. And so I'm just going to glue all of these pieces together just by putting a thin line of glue and then adhering these. And then I'm going to take that strip of paper, and that's going to go vertically on the card panel that we created earlier. And so I've gone ahead and adhered that. And then I grabbed these little leaves from my stash. The colors just worked out perfectly with what I had already created. And so I went ahead and added these leaves for a little bit more texture and a little more interest. And then I'm going to take that piece of twine and wrap it around the back of the card and use a little bit of Scotch tape to hold that in place. And then it's going to just be wrapped around. And again, this adds more texture, it adds a little bit of dimension. So all these things just add a little bit of interest to the card. And then I wasn't so sure about this card. I don't know if it's the colors that I chose for the scarecrow, but I wasn't sure that I was in love with this piece, but I think he's super cute, and so I just went ahead and stayed with it. And then I stamped out that same stamp set that I used for the background. I stamped it out again, and I'm going to use these for little words to add on to the cards. It works perfectly. I did part of the stamp in black and part in orange, but I end up using these on this card and then on my final card as well. And they're just great little words to add. Really easy to cut those out and then set them aside and save them for later for other projects. And then to finish off the card, of course, I'm going to add a little bit of splatter. I added a little bit of white splatter to the card already, and now I'm just taking some gold Liquitex acrylic ink and watering that down a little bit and adding that splatter to the card as well. And that's going to finish off my second card. Really super fun. I love fall colors. They're just so beautiful. And what's great is you can do a mixed media card with these products, or you can do any type of card or other project that you want to make. And so that's why I love the boxes. They're so versatile. So for card 3, I am using some of the pattern paper and that nice slimline stamp that came in the box, the white rubber slimline stamp. I'm again using some pattern paper that I have adhered to a stronger piece of cardstock. And so for the size on this, I'm making a 6x6, and I'm going to be using a lot of water on this, so I am using a piece of watercolor cardstock, and I'm taking some cheesecloth. This is something that should be widely available now, especially coming up on Halloween, but you can find this at the dollar store and it lasts quite a while. So I'm going to use this kind of for the base of my card, and I am adding some Liquitex multimedia matte. This is the same as the Ranger that comes in the little tiny bottles, but it is much more cost efficient because you get a really big bottle for a fraction of the price you would pay for that. Not discouraging anybody from using Ranger, but there are supplies that are similar that work just as well. And so I am using this as a glue. You can use it for a lot of things, for sealing, for collage, but I am going to use it as a glue to glue down the a cheesecloth. And so I took the brush and kind of just patted it down through the cheesecloth to make sure that adhered to my cardstock. And then I'm going to grab some glitter while the glue is still a little bit wet. And the glitters that I'm using are all Maker Forte glitters. This first one is called English Mustard. And I'm just taking my fingers in and taking a pinch and spreading it and then taking another pinch. I have been doing this lately instead of a spoon or shaking it on, because I think this gives kind of just a little splatter of glitter, and then I don't have to worry about excess glitter all over the place, and it's actually a little less messy. You just have to wipe your hands off with a baby wipe and it comes off perfectly. And so I went ahead and added that gold, and then I'm going to add this color purple. Is called Coronation Purple, and then I'm using the holographic black hole for my last color. And then I'm going to take a paper towel just to kind of push in all of that glitter to make sure it sticks, and then anything that doesn't stick comes off on the paper towel. But there is still a bunch of glitter left on there, and then I'm just going to tap it to get off any extra. And I'm going to go ahead and set this aside to dry. And I actually set it aside and went and did a few other things and then came back to it. But next I'm going to use some gesso, and so I am just squirting that out on my mat, and I'm going to take a paintbrush and apply that in several different areas around the card. But gesso is a great staple to have in your crafty arsenal. It can be used for lots of different things. You can use it through stencils. You can use it for covering up areas, especially on mixed media, that you're not particularly happy with, and then going right back over that. It is great for adding texture just on its own, or adding texture like I'm doing here. You can again add it through a stencil, or you can put the gesso down first and push the stencil into it. It's a great way to add. It's great for stamping. I'm going to take the white rubber sunline stamp that came in the box, and I'm basically going to just push that into the gesso. I tried to put the gesso on fairly thick so that I would get a good impression with this stamp. And this stamp is going to be really easy to clean it off. I just take it inside and wash it in the sink, and it comes off really great, just like washing off a stencil. But after I add the texture, I'm going to take my heat tool and dry it because I don't like to wait mainly, but you can set this aside and let it air dry. When you dry it with the heat tool, the gesso is going to puff up a little bit, but then it flattens back out. But I think it just adds a little bit of extra texture. And then I'm grabbing a star stencil from my stash to add a few different stars around the card. And for this I am using a little bit of paper paste. It's got a little bit of a different consistency than some of the other pastes, and so it is more like a paper when it dries, and so I really love using it. So I'm going to add that in several different areas around the card panel, and I will also take my heat tool to this to dry it, and then also set it aside. I wanted it to be completely dry before I moved on to the next step, which is adding some wonderful sprays. And so I'm going to use some Distress ink sprays. These are some of my favorite colors, especially for Halloween. I really love the Seedless Preserves color, and so I'm going to add that first. It's almost like a purple red color, and so I have added that a little bit, and then I'm going to move that color out with some water. Some other mediums that you can use to get the same effect are watercolor powders. You can use re-inkers, you can use liquid watercolor. There's lots of sprays and different items out on the market that would work just as well. And so I'm going to go ahead and kind of move the color around with the water, and then I'm going to add in the Villainous Potion, and so I'm going to add a little bit of that around the color that I already have on there. And again, I'm going to take some water and move that color out. I like taking the water because I like to get the color to move, and I also think it lightens it up slightly so it's not as concentrated. And then the last color that I'm going to use is some black soot. And I am going to spray that just around the outside edges of the card, kind of to frame it out a little bit using the spray. But I don't want it to mix too much into the color that I have on the inside. I will use the water bottle, but I am trying to kind of squirt the color so that it's going off of the edge of the card instead of towards the middle. And so this one, I do not use my heat tool at all. I went ahead and I took a jar and set this panel on top of the jar, and then I went in and did something for a few hours and let it completely dry. And it is now completely dry through the magic of video editing. And I am going to take those pieces that I used from the pattern paper. Again, these are adhered to a piece of white 110-pound cardstock, and I have fussy cut them out. And since there's so much texture on the background, I wanted to make sure this adheres, so I used both my tape runner and some of that liquid adhesive from the little container of the no-show glue that came in the box. And so I'm going to adhere that big pumpkin first, and then I also have a bat, and I'm going to follow the same process, adding a little bit of tape adhesive and then liquid. And then on both of the bat wings, I will add some foam so that that pops up a little bit, and I will go ahead and add that bat. And then those awesome sentiments that I cut out from previously, I am going to use several of those on the card. They fit perfectly. I used trick-or-treating, jack-o'-lantern, and Halloween. And that does it for me for my trio of cards for this crafter party weekend. I had a blast with this box. I would love to see the creations that you create with the contents of the box, with the pattern paper. So if you've already created using the box or created along with us this weekend, we would absolutely love to see what you've made. So if you want to share, please post your creations to the Crafter Party Facebook group so that we all can see what you've worked on. And that is it for me today. I really enjoyed my time with you this weekend, and I hope you are enjoying your weekend as well. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, have fun crafting.